Right at the beginning we sang that little chorus, "A new commandment I give unto you." That was actually singing the way John's Gospel recorded Jesus sharing that teaching. We're now going to listen to the way Mark recorded it in his words, the same message, but good to hear it again. Thanks, Betty. This time, much shorter reading for you.
Mark 12:28-34. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. The Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Then the scribe said, "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one. Besides him there is no other. And to love him with all heart, with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbour as oneself. This is much more important than all the whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." After that, no one dared to ask any questions. This is the word of the Lord.
A few years ago, a radio station ran a contest. Disc jockeys invited all their listeners to tune in their clock radios, and just for fun, they said, when you wake up to the sound of FM 108, when you call, tell us the first words that you spoke when you rolled out of bed today. If you're the third caller each morning, you'll win a $108. So it didn't take long, apparently, for the contest to grow in enthusiasm. The first morning there was a buoyant disc jockey, and he answers, "Caller number 3, what did you say when you rolled out of bed this morning?" And a groggy voice replied, "Do I smell coffee burning?" Another day a sleepy clerical worker reported very hurried words, "Oh no, I'm late for work already." Somebody else said her first words were, "Honey, did I put the dog out last night?" And there was a muffled curse in the background, and then a grumpy voice was heard to say, "No, you didn't." It was quite a successful contest, apparently, and their ratings and audience numbers grew during that time. One morning, however, the third caller said something very unusual. The station phone rang. "Good morning, this is FM 108. You're our third caller and you're on the air. What did you say when you rolled out of bed this morning?" The caller's voice replied, "Do you really want to know what my first words were this morning?" And the bubbly DJ, "Oh yes, sir, tell us exactly what you said." And the caller responded, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." There was an embarrassed moment of silence. And then the radio announcer blurted out, "Sorry, wrong number," and cut to a commercial. That tells us a whole lot, doesn't it, about the world we're living in. So just for fun, try to remember, what did you say this morning when you rolled out of bed? I wonder if any of us have rolled out of bed and have thought to say as our first words before anything else, "Today I'm going to try to love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind and strength. And then I'm going to try to love my neighbour just as much as I love myself." would such a start to our day make any difference to the way we put our love into practice? That's the question. And that's more or less the underlying question that we are thinking about today. How do we change that four-letter word love from being just an admirable word with a beautiful ring to it to make it become a life-changing action word? So I'm going to share another little story that was sent to me a couple of years ago now by a minister friend, not because they knew the people in this story, which they didn't. He had just read about this story, but he added a little, or he just heard this story read to him, and he added a little footnote in his message to me when he sent the story. And he said, "This is almost exactly what I've just seen happen in my own congregation. And boy, oh boy, did it make an impact," he said. And I believe this story is what inspired the thing that happened in his congregation. So that had me a little bit interested, and I read the story that he had sent to me. And in this story, a lady named Varel shares how she was driving and had just rounded the street corner where her house came into full view in front of her. Usually, she says, she would have been thrilled to see 4 cars taking up all the space in their driveway. But that's not how she felt this time. Having just spent a week-long, very stressful vigil at the hospital bedside of her very sick little child, all she could think of was the colossal mess that her house was in when they left it in a hurry in the middle of the night 6 or 7 nights earlier. So turning off the car engine, she was feeling almost overwhelmed by the weight of everything that had happened that week. And not now, not today, she was thinking to herself, I don't have the energy to socialise with anybody. That was thoughts coming through her sleep-deprived haze. She dragged herself to the front door, she unlocked it, and she took a step inside. And this is how she describes what happened next. "What are you doing home so soon?" my friend Julie called out from the kitchen. "We weren't expecting you for another hour. We thought we'd be long gone before you got here." Julie walked quickly towards me from the kitchen, gave me a big bear hug, and then asked me in her soft, caring voice, "And how are you doing?" Well, was this really my house? Was I dreaming? Everything looked so clean and so in place. And where did these flowers come from? And suddenly there were more voices and more hugs. Kathy, smiling and wiping beads of perspiration from her forehead, came in from the family room, where she had just finished ironing a mountain of clean clothes. Regina, another friend, peeked around the corner, having just finished vacuuming all the floors and polishing and dusting furniture in every single room of the house. Joan, who was still upstairs, was wrestling with the boys' bunk bed sheets. She called down her hello from up there, having already brought order out of chaos in all 4 bedrooms. "When did you guys get here?" was my last coherent sentence, said Varel. My tears just flowed in great heaving waves. "How come?" I tried to say. How come you did all this?" But I was crying unashamedly, every ounce of my resistance gone. I'd spent a week praying in the hospital through a health crisis, begging God for just a sense of his presence up there at the hospital. Instead, God laid a mantle of order, beauty and loving care in our home through these 4 angels. There was also a fridge full of frozen meals, and the dining table was laid out for a small banquet with decorative napkins, the whole works. That was for when Burrell's husband and the boys would also be home in a couple more hours. And don't worry, said her friends as they left, we've all been praying for you and with you. Remember, God always has a way of having everything under control, even when we can't see it. And off they drove. After they left, Burrell said she wandered from room to room, still sobbing from the enormity of their gift of time and work and love. In the living room, she finally found a card on the main table, which was meant to be the only clue that would be left to their mystery identity if she hadn't arrived home early. And when she opened the card, it simply read, "The Love Squad was here." Now, stories like that, real stories, and you've heard how that inspired some other people to do their own Love Squad thing. Those stories explain more to us about love than probably a million words, eloquent though they might be, can ever do. So back we go for a moment to Jesus' very famous words, which we call his new commandment to us. Firstly, and a tiny bit ironically, while we call this a new commandment and we sing that way, it wasn't really new at all. By rabbinical count in Jesus' time, their laws consisted of 613 commandments. The scribes, whom we often hear about in the Gospels, would apparently often debate among themselves which one of all those 613 commands was the most important. So it's not surprising in Mark's telling of the story, when this particular one scribe walks past a group of Sadducees arguing with Jesus, and they were arguing about the concept of resurrection, which Sadducees didn't believe in. This scribe took his opportunity while Jesus was there to throw his own trick question back to Jesus. And Jesus was asked, you'll remember, to name the most important commandment. Jesus responded by naming 2 commandments, not 1. And the first that he gave comes from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 4, if you want to check. And the second comes from the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 18. Both, therefore, are found within the first 5 books of the Old Testament that are called the books of the law. It's notable here also that while the scribes in other parts of the Gospels get a fair bit of bad press and are not usually spoken of in a very complimentary way, in this particular case, this scribe, who agrees totally with Jesus' answer, wise answer, gets warmly commended by Jesus. And Jesus says that pretty precious reply, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." That was not something he said lightly or to very many people at all. What was new, however, in what Jesus was saying to them all, was the way he put or plucked those 2 commandments and put them together, making them in effect to be one big commandment, to love God and to love your neighbour as yourself, and to do those 2 things at the same time, like 2 sides to the one coin. And when you think about it, true love of a neighbour springs from the true love for God. And on the other hand, there can be no true love for God if it does not express itself also in loving other people, our neighbours. in very practical terms, if we ever let ourselves get lax and unloving and perhaps poorly prejudiced towards some other people who are still our neighbours in the world, it's not going to be long before that our love and our faithfulness towards God, you will find, also becomes quite lax and compromised. You can't really love God properly, love your neighbour properly, if you aren't doing both those things together. Anyone who is getting close to the kingdom of God, Jesus reminded us there through his word to the scribe, getting close to the kingdom, people realise that a person's attitude and love towards God and a person's attitude and love towards the people around them are so closely interrelated that they are like twine in a rope together. So the challenge is always before us as Christians to keep on as good a track as we possibly can in loving God whom we can't see, while at the same time keeping on as good a track as we can loving other people in our lives, our neighbours whom we can see. Now this wasn't new to the scribe, and I know it's not new to any of us. We've heard it all before. The test comes back very simply, what do we do with these words of Jesus? Well, secondly, and this is the last point I want to make this morning, love as a word is not just a noun, which is a naming word, where you identify a thing that you can describe and talk about, in this case, love. But the word love is also a verb, and a verb is a doing word, an action word. Most people, I think, will admit they are better, much better at naming what love is than they are, that's the noun side of love, than they are at doing love, the verb side to love. In fact, one of the harshest, oldest and probably most damaging criticisms that has been levelled at Christians over and over for the last 2,000 years has been where critics ridicule Christians for the all too common disconnection that the world sees between the words of love that Christians will speak on the one hand and the acts of love that Christians too often don't seem to be doing. So the uneasy truth for us is, if you don't properly get that connection between love of God and love of neighbour, and if you don't get the connection between the noun that understands what love is and the verb that puts it into practice and actually does it, then the impact of your witness in the world as a Christian at best is not going to be very convincing, and at worst could even turn people away from the Lord and the gospel. So that's why stories like the Love Squad, when you hear them, make such a powerful impact. It's very, very hard, even for the harshest critic, to say a bad word about people who put their words and talk into practical action that's visible and can't be denied. What a great witness to God it becomes. And that's the sort of Christian witness that often brings people back to the faith, back to the church community, back in their own lives to Jesus again. It's a sort of genuine love expressing itself that really can and does change lives. And that's the sort of love Jesus was drawing the disciples and the scribes and the Sadducees back towards that love that has been in their teachings almost since the beginning of time. So to wrap it all up, big challenges are always there for us when this little word love pops up in front of us. We've heard it all before. We aren't necessarily being asked to copy what other people do, but to be sure that our love is never just words or can't be criticised as being just words, but can be seen to be visible, tangible actions. So it's over to all of us now, you and me together, to demonstrate that we have heard what Jesus said, and to do that not just once, not just occasionally, not just when we feel bothered to do it, but over and over again, showing that we understand and we do what Jesus was talking about in that greatest commandment. Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbour as yourself." Amen. Let's close.